Inside, do you see where it says comments?
Oh.
Hello. All right. Hello. I think we should be live here. Let's see.
Got it.
Are we live? Let's double. Yeah, we're live. We're here.
We're live.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Reason We Learn. This is our live show today with Quincy Bingham. So Quincy and I became acquainted after I read a blog post that he did, and I thought it was fantastic. So I, in a roundabout way, found a way to communicate with them through I think it was Free Black Thought.
Yes.
And they pointed me towards your email and so forth. And here we are. So how about you tell us a little bit about who you are and your blog post?
Who I am and my blog post. Okay, so I'm Quincy Bingham, Quincy Lee Stephen Bingham, originally from Jackson, Mississippi, small town in the deep South. I came here about 10 years ago. I wouldn't say 10 years. It was 2, yeah.
And we should point out that you're in Chicago now,
yes,
right?
I'm in Chicago. 2008 is when I came to Chicago. So, and now it's 2020. So that's 12 years. So, yeah, the time flies. So I'm in Chicago right now. I've been here working as a digital marketer. That's kind of my career path. It always wasn't like that. In Jackson, Mississippi, I worked a lot of jobs, did graphic design. Then I moved here after graduating from Hines Community College. So I have a long track record as far as like meeting different people, being in different kind of cultures, being exposed to a lot of different things. I went to Columbia College here, and that's kind of how I ended up in Chicago. After graduating from Columbia College, that's when I went into digital marketing. And I taught for a short stint at DePaul University after I've had a number of years in digital marketing. So I've been across the board on a lot of different things.
Very cool. And so tell me what prompted you? I should give a little background. The blog post title, I think, was, remind me again, it was like Life as a Double Minority or something.
Double minority, that's
yeah. Yes. And it caught my eye as I'm scrolling through Twitter. I'm like, what's this going to be? And the reason wasn't so much the title, because it was the location at Free Black Thought. Because these days, if you see double minority, you can think, oh, let's see, intersection of, Black and gay. Or it was like, I'm thinking the way people talk about minorities, my brain immediately went to that because that's what everybody says. But then I said, wait, no, Free Black Thought wouldn't do that. So like, what is this? So I read it, and, I just thought, I got to talk to this guy because it was clear from reading it that it was difficult. It was a difficult step for you to write it, to kind of come out, as it were. And then that you were processing something, that like the whole act of writing it felt to me like you were thinking something through. Is that correct? Did I read that right?
Oh, wow. So that is one of my favorite pieces because, as you know, 2020 was a long year for a lot of people, right? So I wrote that, I think, early in the year when all the George Floyd protests were happening. And just to give a little background on my writing, when the pandemic first started around March or something, I was furloughed from my not my current job, but my job then. And I started out just happy, like I don't have to work. And then I started playing video games, specifically Halo. I don't play anything else but Halo. And I started thinking, and then stuff started to feel weird with coronavirus and COVID-19. And it just, a lot of things didn't seem right. And it was like, I need to seek out or do something more productive than just sitting around watching TV and playing video games. So I started writing a lot. Usually before then I wrote mostly about digital marketing, but I started writing a lot about, what was going on in the world, a lot of information stuff, because I'm online as a digital marketer. I'm online almost every day. Right. And I start to see certain trends develop. And when the George Floyd protest hit, it just hit me that all of this stuff about critical race theory, and we'll talk more about that later, but critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, all that stuff came to fruition. It hit home for me, and it became personal. And that's why I started writing that blog. So, I mean, I guess that's a long-winded answer, but there was a lot of stuff that I saw that I felt like wasn't being said by the national news media, or anyone for that matter, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And so for the folks who haven't read it yet, explain what you meant by like a double minority. Like how so there?
So the double minority part came into play when I was looking at everything that was going on, right? And I'm like, I'm in a minority on this. I mean, it was also weird because I began to agree with what people would call a lot of right-wing people. Like, I'm like, there's a lot of facts here that are not being stated. And in that movement, especially Black Lives Matter, became such a powerful movement that it crushed out any questioning of the narrative. And I'm like, wow, these are the things that I really want to talk about, and I want to address the problems of what we see on TV, but no one's talking about it. And I felt scared to mention it because I'll go online. I'm like, if I say something, people will like just eviscerate me.
Right.
So that's why I felt that's a double minority. It wasn't a double minority like I'm two different races.
Right.
It was, I am a Black person that is a minority in this thought process of like, how do we address this problem in a practical way?
Right.
That's what I meant about the double minority part, if that makes sense.
Yep, makes perfect sense. And I thought the piece was great because what you focused on so much there is what I talk about here a lot, which is critical thinking and using reason. So I like the fact that you weren't so much coming to any specific conclusion about what was going on, just that it bothered you that people were rushing to judgment and not using their brains. That it was kind of like there's a narrative, and if you don't repeat the narrative blindly, then you're on the outs. Like you're not right thinking. You know what I'm saying? It's not that you're not like right or left. It's just you have to think one certain way, and that we talked about this on the phone, that you almost become like an avatar for an entire people, and you stop being you.
Yes.
You know, Quincy. It's like, hi, I'm me. Yeah. I got my own opinions.
Well, yes, that's that was the big problem because and there's a lot of other factors that have to play into that, because I was back and forth home with my mom in Mississippi, and I was having the discussions there and I was having discussions here, and there were a lot of people who didn't have the same viewpoint, but they were like, no, I'm not saying that in public. Like that's what kind of triggered me, is that when I came back to Chicago, when I had the discussion with Chicago, and one thing to mention here in Chicago, in this neighborhood that I'm living in, it's majority white people, right? So the bar that I go to, the people I associate with, like on a routine basis, they all had this narrative that I'm oppressed. Or it's either, I wouldn't say.
I don't mean to laugh. It's just like, I imagine that'd be weird. People like going, "Oh, you're so oppressed." You're like, "I live in the same place as you, dude. Like we're in the same bar."
Like, you know, well, if I could tell the story of like when I first came to Chicago, I think that was the rude awakening for me, especially as a Southern Black man. And I think the fact that I'm from the South plays a lot into this. In the South, we weren't exposed. We see this stuff on TV, or we hear it in like a lot of what they call conscious rap music. But when you're in Chicago and you're, you know, surrounded by like the liberal culture, it's like they're obsessed with politics, and like that's all they talk about. All I heard was like either that or like, you know, something about Trump, or, you know, and then that's not the vibe in Jackson, Mississippi. And I think that probably has a lot to do with it's a lot of Black people, like it's a majority Black city. So no one goes around talking about how oppressed they are, if that makes sense.
And I bet that was surprised the people in Chicago,
Yes.
because I think they have like a caricature of like the Southern, the Southern people, and then just in Southern Black people specifically,
Mhm.
like, oh, it must be worse there. And I've lived in different places in the South, and I've always maintained it's the opposite. The most
Mhm.
racist place I ever lived was Boston, Massachusetts. It was
Yes.
like hardcore.
It's kind of a weird dynamic because, like, there is like Mississippi is the poorest state in the union by far,
Right.
and like I, s- I'm from the one of the poorest neighborhoods in the capital city of Jackson, Mississippi. I know what poverty is, but since it's like a majority Black culture, there's a lot of talk about, like, you see on the news gun violence. There's a lot of talk. I don't know. It just wasn't the oppression narrative. It was like real problems because we're just normal people, and we had normal problems. Like my mom had to work long hours to make sure we had food on the table. Those are the kind of issues that we talked about. Now, I will say that when I got to Chicago, one of the experiences I did feel, because, and just to give you a idea of my experience when I first came to Chicago, I lived in a dorm on the lake, right?
Hmm.
And I went to Columbia College, which is majority, it's a liberal arts school,
Hmm.
majority white people, right? So, and they're, I don't want to use the word woke, but I mean, it has,
Their word, man. They
yes,
picked it. I
yes,
don't
yes.
know.
So when I first got there, I was like, look, guys, I mean, I like hanging out with you guys and doing, stuff like, going to these parties or whatever. I mean, I started drinking whiskey, which is not a thing in the South. Um, but I was sitting around, I think
Bourbon.
it was
Gotta
called
switch to bourbon.
bourbon. And I was sitting around, I was like, hey guys, let's go on the South Side. And they looked at me like I had, like, I don't know, cursed their mother or something. They were like, no, dude, that's going to mess up your day if you go on the South Side. Don't do that. And I'm like, well, I want to see some Black people. So we had what you call a U pass, where you get a pass on the train to go anywhere in the city. So I
Right.
just started going by myself. And I mean, I gotta say, I was horrified by what I saw. Like, it was shocking to see. You see it on movies. Like, I know one of the movies we watched as kids was Coley High.
Hmm.
You see the poverty in neighborhoods on the movies, but when you see it up front and close, it is shocking, because poverty in Jackson, Mississippi is different from poverty in Chicago, Illinois. Everything is relative. Like if people were poor and broke, but they weren't. It felt destitute. Like there was trash everywhere, and it just feels like It felt hopeless, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And I understood that, and that from that angle, I understand why a lot of there's these political movements, but at the same time, it's like you're not going to help anyone by teaching them that they are oppressed. And
Hmm.
maybe that's just me coming from my experience in Jackson, Mississippi, and how I work my way out of that. And I don't like the bootstrap narrative as far as that conversation goes. I like it as an entrepreneur kind of conversation, but it's like there has to be another way than teaching people that white people are evil and that they are the reason why you're oppressed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what critical race theory does in a way.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem to like literally start with the premise that if you see a disparity, it is because of racism somewhere. So it's kind of like the outcome is the conclusion, as
Yes.
opposed to we're going to arrive at this conclusion because we've done the work to investigate the evidence and the data,
Mm-hmm.
and we have found this direct link between people's thoughts, attitudes, behaviors, and treatment of people that then resulted in this outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, one of the ironies that I see is that this whole push is the systemic racism. Like that's how it feels to me. Is like when you say to somebody, you have no power. You have no personal power inside of you as an individual. You have to wait. for somebody else to act, for somebody else to get out of the way. It's white supremacy. In other words, like we have all these things and you don't. And
Yes.
so we have, it's like, you need us. To me, it feels so arrogant. That feels like the white supremacy. That
Yeah.
feels like the systemic racism to me, to say to somebody, I expect the same of you as of anybody else in your, let's say, socioeconomic. Like, and I think if you want to look at socioeconomic situations, if you
Mm-hmm.
want to look at parentage, like, don't have two parents in the home, that
Mm-hmm.
right there, it could be an issue, right? Maybe you have an illness. Like, I mean, there are other things that can impact an individual. Don't know that there's a societal or government solution. In fact, I tend to shy away from government solutions, but it's like they're so attached to the systemic argument
Mm-hmm.
because it's like they've already decided we need a government solution, and they're trying to like retrofit the problem to
Mm-hmm.
the solution they have in mind. It's kind of how it feels to me.
Well, there's so much I can say about that.
I don't know. If you disagree, go ahead. It's okay.
No. Well, so it it comes from a place of compassion, but there's no logic or critical thinking that goes into it. There's no questioning that narrative because it's such an emotional thing for a lot of people. And the irony is, it's more emotional for quote unquote the white liberal. I hate that phrase too, but like I have, it's what it is. It's more of so. Just to give you an example, to go back to my Columbia days, and over the years, it's become a thing that has popped up in my life, my personal experience over and over again. And I think one of my most dramatic experiences is back to Columbia College in that dorm on the lake. I began dating this white woman in my dorm. Uh, it was, I mean, to make a long story short, it was one of the worst experiences I've ever had in my life. And it's not, it was rooted in that kind of ideology, I would like to say, because our relationship or our interaction, um, and I don't think it was because I was black. I think that's just who she had became. I think she just became a person that was taking these gender study classes, and that was her major. And she was trying to be a psychologist, and everything became about the patriarchy or oppression here. And she started to notice it everywhere. Like I would just be chilling, listening to Jay-Z, and I would get a 2-hour lecture of why Jay-Z is pushing the patriarchy, and like it was every little thing. And like, keep in mind, I'm just a Southern black guy. Like, not only was I not politically active, I just want to chill and like, I don't know, like hang out or something. And nothing, it was always something that was rooted in systemic evil. And that's what I think critical race theory, um, intersectionality,
Mm-hmm.
there's a couple of them. Most of them are in this group of ideas of postmodernism,
Mm-hmm.
where in which everything is relative, and that allows people in these what I call grievance studies to see evil in everything around them, and I think it messes up a lot of people's lives. Really, the people. I'm pretty sure she wasn't. I don't know if she was getting taught that at home, not at home, or in her home school, but in college, that's a big thing. Especially when I was going back in 2008, that was huge because I was in other classes where it's just like urban geography or like your basic courses. And I'm like, yes, I get to learn about urban geography. I love geography in high school, but it became gentrification and white people taking over and like pushing. It became all this other stuff, and like, you're oppressed, Quincy. Like, how do you not understand this? And we had all these debates. I like debates, but it became a thing where I was like, I don't know. That's kind of the idea of the double minority. I was like, I don't know if I understand where you guys are coming from. I mean, I see problems, but it's not a solution to sit around and blame people. Am I making sense here? Like,
You're making total sense. I mean, like but that's it. And like I said, I could sit there and I could say the same things,
mhm,
but then the argument's always, well, you're not black, so you don't know.
mhm,
And I'm the type of person that I first of all, I think that's like a logical fallacy that you can't know something unless you personally experience. I mean, you can't know it in your cells. Like you can't know what it feels like. You can't
mhm,
truly empathize, but you can understand, for example, looking at economics or looking at urban geography, and you can say, I'm a smart enough person to understand that there are, 5 or 6 different things that could be impacting this problem,
mhm,
not just one. And so if I say, I think it's a lot more complicated than that, I think you're oversimplifying. I think you're blaming, you're rushed to blame something that, fits a certain narrative or whatever, that you feel that now you have power to fix it, or now
mhm.
you somehow it can make you look good if you care about this or whatever. I always get the feeling that that's what it's about, that it's this massive projection of like, look at me, I'm a good person. And that the people who are most committed to these narratives they don't want to hear the details, because solving the problem isn't really their issue. It's identifying it.
Yeah.
I've identified. Look at me, I'm smart. And you're like, but you haven't fixed anything.
That was what the issue is. I think it's a multi-layer issue because a lot of these classes that I was in were like a lot of how do I say it? They were social science classes, right?
Right.
And I was at a liberal arts school. My favorite classes happened to be my finance classes, and my accounting classes, my entrepreneurship classes, because that was my minor. And it's like I'm coming from the world of solving problems. Like
Right.
that's what they're teaching us, how to solve problems. So when I come to these classes and I hear this stuff, it's like, but like let's look at some data and see how we can dive into the data, or look at and I was poor before, so I'm
Yeah.
from the poorest neighborhood in the poorest state. Like I know what that's like, and I know I at least have an idea of how to address this. I'm not saying that I can solve a problem or I have all the answers, but I know like I have an idea or a way of addressing it. And that
Right.
was totally being ignored because I was like, hey, if we can get these businesses, if we encourage businesses to like in this neighborhood, because I did live for a certain stint, I did live on the south side on like 43rd and Champlain, somewhere around there. But like, and I saw it firsthand. I was like, well, there's an economic side of this problem from what I see. And a lot of it, the majority of it is psychological. Um, because, like I said, there was another incident where another girlfriend I had in college, I think it was second or third year. She used to come and visit me on the south side, and like the kids were just like looking at her like she was like some goddess or something. I'm like, this is weird, dude. Like, I understand that you don't see when people come to the south side like this, but like if you don't, it felt to me like they value her life more than theirs. That's what it felt like. Well, that's
It's
more
so
my
heartbreaking.
it was one of it shook me like internally because I was like, this is not right.
Yeah.
And that I understood that issue, but I also understand that me asking another white person for a handout, or me like asking people to like, I don't know, listen or whatever they say, that's not going to solve those problems. Like that, it is a systemic problem, but it's not really systemic. I mean, systemic racism does exist in a sense, but that's not what's going to get from point A to point B in these
Right.
neighborhoods where children that's just growing up. And I think that's where you come in with the education system. It's like
Yeah,
it has to start from there.
you mentioned in your piece, you said, it's like they're chasing ghosts. And so then that was the title of this cast, because I feel like it is, the people, who did the worst. And even when I was growing up in the 70s and early 80s going to school, people even talk, we need to stop whitewashing history. I'm like, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I was in school in the 70s. I was in elementary school, and we were learning about the evils of slavery and the evils of Jim Crow and how it was very recent. Civil Rights Act was like, look over my shoulder, was a couple years before I was born, so was very recent history. They were talking about it. They were talking about, there was never a time in school where I recall getting a whitewashed history. So it was like a shock to me that people are telling me, like, can we just teach history differently? And I'm like, differently than what? Like, what 3 people on the planet are not being told that slavery was horrible, and that, the Trail of Tears, how we read books about Trail of Tears. We read how awful Andrew Jackson was. I mean, I'm just like at a loss to understand where they're coming from. It's almost like they have such a sense of presentism that they've rewritten my history. Like, people have in their minds going like, well, in the past, I'm like, I'm in the past. I didn't live there. I lived in the past. I was there. Okay. I'm older than you 20-something-year-olds. And I can tell you, I didn't learn this. So if your school taught you this, and then you ask them, did your school teach us? No, but I know that in the past. I'm like, what, 100 years ago? How long ago are we talking about? Yes, in the past. But they're acting like it's happening still. And it's not happening still. And so I think, my problem is, they're taking what's a legit thing, which is we've got to teach the unvarnished truth. I mean, you don't want to teach kids like it's all rosy and perfect, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think, first of all, you got to do it in an age appropriate way. So look at your audience. What are they literally capable of understanding in terms of concepts, right? And then if you only focus on the dark and the terrible and the bad, and you sum up a person from the past solely on something bad they did or a way they thought differently that today we would think is terrible, right? But for their time was pretty standard at the time. And you don't look at the whole of the totality of their life, or the good things that they did, or even the good things they said, or the good ideas they had. If you just want to throw everything out because they had this thought in 200 years ago or whatever, I think that's doing the kids a disservice, because we have an opportunity to learn about progress. If you look at someone, let's say Thomas Jefferson, and you can say, he was a product of his time, but he was also ahead of his time in these 4 or 5 respects. And it's a good thing he was, because we got the Declaration of Independence, which, while we weren't able to live up to it for a long, long time, we had an aspirational document. We had a document that no other country or culture ever had, which was, this is where we'd like to be, but we're not there, right? And it took a long time. It took, by some people's estimation, too long, by mine, of course. But it was there, though. That was a great idea. It's not like he wrote down in the Declaration, except Black people. You know what I mean? Yeah. At least it wasn't written down. Yeah. At least it wasn't codified. So I guess where I come at it is that to tell the kids today that everybody that came before was bad because they don't agree with the people today, that there hasn't been progress, you take away hope. You see, if you can show progress, even if it's incremental, even if it's not perfect, you give people something to say, well, and I'm going to actually be able to achieve. Your quote at the end of your piece, I loved. And it was, that you have to believe that the future, tomorrow can be better, something like that, and that you have the power to change it. And I believe that the critical race theory stuff in the classroom is taking that away. Instead of teaching that message, which doesn't say things are good, it doesn't say things are perfect. You're just telling someone, wherever you are, tomorrow could be better. It could be. Will it be? I don't know. It's going to be a combination of you and the circumstances, but your circumstances don't define you completely. They just don't. And when you tell children that they do, I feel like you pull the rug out from under them, and it's got to leave you feeling like hopeless. Am I crazy here? Is this like...
Well, the biggest example that I can think of, all of my examples, I mean, there may be, I have a lot of factual examples, but like anecdotal examples, the people who have I've seen who have fully embraced this stuff, they don't have anything positive to say. And I like what you said there. You said 2 things. Presentism. It's like a narcissism that we have, that the way we're doing things right here, right now, are the best that they not only are the best that it's better than the past, which kind of is, but it's better than anything we could have in the future. So, but at the same time, you're teaching kids like everything is bad, and you're not giving them any kind of blueprint, or I think in philosophy and religion, they call it like a logos, like a meaning. You're not giving them a mission in life other than to chase ghosts.
Right. And dismantle, the word dismantle comes up a lot. And I think the part that's concerning me is because it's not data driven, because it's not evidence based, whether it's in education or even just in culture, medicine, and, it's increasingly finding its way into other things. We're having, equity based medicine, equity based law, everything's about equity, and equity is like equal outcome. If you are going to ignore the very real differences between people, and I just read something the other day that showed that, believe it or not, there are way more inborn things about us than we want to admit. And of course, that's the third rail. Nobody wants to talk about things like, what's in your DNA as far as just not, and race isn't. It's the one thing that literally isn't, with the exception of some hereditary diseases and stuff. It's not like the color of your skin does not have anything to do with it. And so they're putting all the emphasis on the thing that all the data shows us is the very, very small, like a very small amount of the situation. And it's also the thing that you could change, or that you could at least look at the data to figure out how to help someone else change. But we're not doing that. And because we're not doing that, we're throwing out so much information that it would be really helpful to understand how to put together practical solutions. Like in education, if you look, you were talking about, the achievement gap. And if I look at that and I see that kids aren't reading, and kids aren't, they're not reading, and they're not doing math at something they call grade level. Okay. I don't see any way that telling them you're a victim and all this other stuff, how does that improve your reading ability? We know that literacy lifts people out of poverty, not all by itself, but without it, you have much less hope, right? Same thing with, let's dismantle the nuclear family, right? Well, we know from the data that the nuclear family has a big impact, probably is the number one determining factor for, by the way, all races. If you have a father in the home, that will help you keep you out of poverty. And so now they're saying we got to completely, it's already been dismantled organically by all those perverse incentives away from forming couples, away from waiting till you're married to have children. So we've already have a ton of weird incentives, financial incentives. And now you're telling people there's going to be a cultural incentive to do something that we know for a fact by the data is harmful to children. I don't see how this helps any person, never mind a person, as you pointed out, who's already behind the eight ball. If you admit, as most people on the left do, there are populations that are already suffering at a greater rate, okay, like at a higher percentage. There's a disparity. We can't ignore it. It's like you'd be blind not to see it, okay? So there it is. How do you start there and lift people up by pushing everyone else down? That's not how it works.
No,
that's not how it works. My friend Chris Paisley, who is a school teacher, and he wrote the book Exploring White Fragility, he has a YouTube channel. He likes the approach of like lower the floor, but keep the ceiling high. Where you, in other words, you scaffold and you help people who need extra help, and they need to get to a point where they can begin. Whether kids in school, for example, because they don't have a father in the home, they don't have books in the home, they don't have some of these things that help more than money, for example, right? If you have books in your home and there's people who read in your home and they read a newspaper, or they read, if you see your grandmother reading, even if you're poor, you see that the written word is important, right? So, but you could have a big screen TV and a video game or whatever and be slightly higher in the socioeconomic level, but nobody reads.
Yes.
That could hurt you more, right? So he's talking about like, find out where the children are, get in there with the right supports early. Don't make it about race. Don't make it about all this other stuff they can't change. They can't change that.
Yes.
But nobody can change it. Yes. So, but we can get the written word in front of them. We can talk about literacy. We can talk about family supports, community supports. But what I'm seeing is this like weird, superficial, it almost feels performative. Let's
It
focus
is
on stuff
performative.
people can't change, and we can pat ourselves on the back and go, see, we care, but nothing happens. Nothing changes.
And that's what makes it so despicable to me. Like you're first of all, it's performative. It is. I think it's all performative. But it's also self-serving, and that you are virtue signaling.
Yeah.
You're all you're doing is just making yourself feel good because you believe in the idea of white privilege or white guilt,
Right.
and you are feeling guilty. Therefore, you're going to put up a social media black profile thing.
Like a square, little black
Where,
square.
you're
Right.
you're lecturing people about stuff, but you're not really actively doing things or actively supporting. I wouldn't say they're not actively supporting things, because there are a lot of groups and organizations where you can actually do something about this stuff. But when you push theories in education, and that's the main focus of the day, when you push ideologies such as I think you said something about how they are teaching people, they're teaching one race is better than the other, or that your race is bad and the other race should be uplifted by you. Basically, that's like moral relativism. That's nothing is objective anymore. It's
Right.
almost like we're teaching people not to solve problems, because the only way you can solve real problems is have a shared objective reality about that problem.
Yep.
Whenever you come to a situation and you tell one person whatever you believe, however you feel, not only is it valid, because all feelings are valid, but that is going to be the catalyst for policy that
Mhm.
affects millions of people. You see what I'm saying?
Exactly. It's like what's your limiting principle? Where's the bench? Like where do you stop if everybody's feelings are valid and everything is I mean, I, I just and they're making it racist to say these things. Like that what we are saying right now, that you need to identify the objective reality that you're dealing with. And of course, that does mean looking at data. You can't look at some data and say that data is racist. We don't consider that data. It's like data isn't racist. It's data. It's
Yeah.
if you can tell me with evidence that the person manipulated the data for a racist purpose. But if you just take raw numbers from a census, or raw numbers from employment information, or raw numbers from who's in jail, okay, you just count the people or something, and then you come back and report there's X number of people, and then they say yes, but you have to look at what goes on in the courts. And I'm like, okay, well, but now you have to look at what goes on in different courts in different states. And now you have to look at each individual's arrest record. And now you've got to look at, so, okay, you want to go there? You want to parse it? Let's all the way parse it. I was willing to start here with you, but if you want to go backwards, you don't get to stop where it's convenient for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to start going into the nitty gritty, you also have to consider the individual. And that's what they never want to do. They don't want to go there, because this whole thing to me is like an effort to get rid of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
You aren't an individual. You're a black man. You're not Quincy, okay? And I'm not me. I'm a white woman, and I'm not even a woman anymore. Apparently, I'm just a white uterus owner. Like womanhood has been erased. I don't get to even have that anymore.
and now you're sounding like a white wing nut. So because
right, because I dare to say that there should be such a thing as a woman still. That makes me, I'm now a TERF. That's crazy.
And we can't have any conversations anymore, because in the thing, back to the George Floyd thing, that was a very tragic situation.
Yeah, of course.
But there are certain factors there that have to be considered. But at the same time, like I said, there's another aspect of this is digital marketing from a person who is online all the time. Like, part of my job is to track what people are doing online. And the other part is, why do I track what people are doing online? So I can figure out how to pull their heartstrings and sell them more stuff. I'm not like
Right.
I'm not a I'm not ashamed of that. I love what that I love that part of my job. Like, but at the same time, when I see those same tactics being used by the news media to push faulty generalizations about things such as all black men are being hunted down, and when you look at the data, it's like no. Or when you look at the facts behind the George Floyd arrest, it's like we can extrapolate that maybe I forgot his name was racist, or maybe he wasn't racist. But at the same time, that's a separate issue from the issue of police brutality.
Right.
That wasn't addressed at all. Well, it was addressed, ironically, by I think Tim Scott, a Republican or whatever. But at the same time, we aren't really solving those problems because this massive ideology that is being taught in schools is taking over, and it's almost becoming like a religious cult. It's becoming something where you don't need proof, or you don't need anything that's unfalsifiable. You just need to believe in this thing, and now you're a good person. And you need to constantly repent and whitewash, and all the while the problem still is occurring. The problem is still happening.
I think James Lindsay has said it has all the features of a cult. And the difference between it and a traditional religion is there's no redemption.
Oh yeah,
there's no redemption. Wow. So I even though I am not a religious person, I don't want to besmirch the faiths that have redemption, where it's kind of like you're forgiven and your past doesn't define you. And if you're not going to be held accountable. I mean, now you're going back. People who want to say that defines you, you're like a Calvinist. And it's like, that's it. Worse than that, right? You were born bad. You were born bad. You're going to hell. That's the predestination. But this is cult-like also in the way it spreads and the way it manipulates. It manipulates people. I think it manipulates tender-hearted people, vulnerable people, people with good intentions get manipulated. Kids, especially. Part of why I'm so concerned about it in the schools is that you're talking about children who are, pre-rational in terms of their brain development, and you have both the power differential in terms of the teachers literally in power over you, and your brain is susceptible to peer pressure in a way that it's not going to be if you can make it to 18 or 25 or so without this influence. I think the reason that college kids have been changing so much with this is that they were already primed, if that makes sense. I think if they had an education up until college, the way I did, like, for example, this stuff is not new, right? I've told you that. And this was coming out, in the 80s. And when I was in college, where they burned Reagan in effigy on the quad, he was stupid. He was evil. He was a Nazi. He was, all these things. And so this isn't really all that new, but I was lucky enough to have the dad I had, the grandfather I had. I went to a private school for high school that was quite liberal, but there were enough people there teaching me who were older, who kept their politics out of the classroom. So even though I didn't make a lot of friends, I had my teachers who were solid. It was like, I couldn't have told you what their politics were if my life depended on it. I don't know. So they taught the old fashioned way of like, I'm going to teach you how to think and keep my business out of it. So by the time I got to college and this was hitting hard, I was already like, I'm good. You guys, whatever. Like, I'm not going to, I was alone. Like I said, I was lonely, but it didn't sway me. I think these kids are getting to college. They don't know how to think.
And I think that's the most important part about all of this is there's two points. They don't know how to think. And I would say three. They don't know how to think. And the better way to say that is they haven't been taught how to critically think about things and how to disseminate information.
Exactly.
The other thing is that from a person who grew up in a poor black neighborhood, it's like you're not they're not giving any hope for the future. Um, they're not given anything to believe in as far as like I could become, I don't know, an astronaut or something. Those are not things that this ideology teaches. As a matter of fact, a lot of these people, the proponents of and I went to a liberal arts school, so a lot of my friends or people I associated with were, aspiring teachers. And none of them had any affinity for like, any kind of technology or space or anything
Mhm.
like that. It wasn't about that. As a matter of fact, it was kind of the opposite. It's like, why are we concentrating on things like that when there's poverty around or there's all these social issues or ills? And what that produces is students, they grew up, that was 10 years ago. Now those people are teaching people in these schools. And what they're doing is they're not giving them any kind of hope or aspiration, not as a black kid, but they're not giving them any aspirations as human beings.
Exactly. It's just like the death of hope. And if you tell one side of the room like you're evil because you're oppressors, and the other side you're evil because, or not evil, but you're like the good guys because you're the victims, but you're also, helpless. So, and all we need to, and in every class we're going to focus on all these problems as opposed to all the good things that are going on. I mean, first of all, it isn't true. We actually live in a time when there's some amazing things happening.
Yeah,
We
they
have
are.
rockets that go up and come back down again. Like that when I was a kid, that was inconceivable. Okay. We put a man on the moon, but to do what? What, to compete with the Russians? Now we're sending landing machines to Mars and landing them to actually do things like collect samples and send back pictures and, travel around and look for water and all kinds of stuff. And these kids could be learning about so many exciting things that are happening in the world. Also, what is the tragedy of our time, in my opinion, is that we got to a point, and it was ironically right about the time of the Trump presidency, we were
Mhm.
at a point in the world where worldwide poverty, worldwide famine, worldwide all these things were on the way down. These things were actually improving at a rapid clip. We have some other things that need to be addressed, obviously climate, pollution, there's some things like that. But never were we at a point in human history where we had the technology and the money really to do as much about it as then. Like, I mean, it was almost like we could maybe tackle some of the stuff, not by just throwing money at it, but by putting our minds to work. And if we had a movement in schools like we did with the space race to say, hey, kids, we're going to learn science and we're going to learn math and we're going to
Mhm.
learn so many cool things so that you can go out there and be part of the solutions because you guys are the future and it's going to be awesome and you can make so much progress. Look at the progress we've made in such a short period of time. These kids will be excited, show them role models like, in space exploration or in science or, whatever, have those be their role models. Instead, we're making activists the role models. We're making people who complain and fight and put their fists in the air. And I
Yes.
feel like we're setting these kids up to go down a path towards their own demise. I mean, in some senses, literally. And that is to me not only wasteful in terms of human capital and knowledge, but just human lives. And people say, well, we care. And I'm like, you're literally consigning people to a lifetime of struggle and telling them it's virtuous. That to me is backwards. It's regressive. It's depressing.
Mhm.
It is more about the person doing the teaching than about the person receiving the help.
Mhm.
And I think we really need to, I don't know, just keep interrupting that process by challenging it. But it's scary, right? It was scary for you to write that.
It was. I mean, it's over the last year. I wrote I've wrote a few more pieces on the I brought receipts blog. It's on Medium. Um, it's scary because there's constantly this movement um, to faulty. It's a bunch of faulty generalizations. I I feel like I use that phrase a lot, but that's what it amounts to. And when I use the phrase faulty generalization, I mean, you look at one thing and you extrapolate or think that one incident, that one event is just a microcosm of what's going on in the whole. And that's what happened with
Right.
what people think is wrong with police brutality. That's the problem with even these ideas.
Right.
These ideas aren't the normal narrative, so they must be in this whole thing of white supremacy or right wing ideas or things like that. And it's just, it's, I feel like we're in this culture war that wants to delegitimize anything that doesn't fit the mainstream narrative. And the
Right.
scary part about it is, I first ran into this in Columbia College 10 years ago. I've been seeing it in spurts, but last year was the year when all of this stuff hit mainstream. Like I was seeing it on campuses. I was like having arguments with debates with certain people. I thought it was just like a Columbia College thing. I'm like, I'm going to this wacky liberal arts school, whatever. But now it's gone mainstream, and now it's taken over everything. And one of the other aspects of this is that it hit culture a few years ago with Star Wars and Star Trek. Like I saw it in there. Like they abandoned what I like to call the hero's journey. It's a literary thing where the hero's journey is an aspect of the human psyche because it's in all books. It's in the Odyssey. It's in
Yeah.
your classic texts. It's in the Bible. All of these stories, whether you are religious or not, have an aspect of the hero's journey.
What do you
Well,
think about the people who want to get rid of those, though? That the people who are trying to disrupt text, I think, is the group where
oh,
they're
really?
yeah, it's called disrupt text, and they have already gotten rid of Homer, and they're getting rid of
They got rid of
Shakespeare.
Homer?
Yeah, they don't want Homer taught anymore, and
Are you serious?
yeah, there are colleges who are literally doing away with classics departments entirely. They're
Um,
saying we got to do away with Homer, we got to do away with Shakespeare. Disrupt text is all about getting rid of the canon completely because it's too white, and they yeah. And so the list of books that they like to replace them with, of course, is what you would imagine. It's a lot of the new book. They're very, very newly written books. They're not all bad. Like, I mean, there's some of them that are good, interspersed with some of them that are just nothing but victim narratives. But it's a lot of the anti-racist stuff. You know, Ibram X. Kendi's books are on the list now, and that's not, fiction. They also want to downplay fiction. I'm not even sure they'll be reading Ellison. I mean, Ellison wouldn't have stood for this. Ellison loved Faulkner, so there
oh,
are some tremendous Black authors who fought really hard against the notion that they needed to write only Black stories. So, like, I want to write literature. Don't consign me to I have to write only my story. And why can't I just be a writer like any other writer, right? And so, but that is one of the pushes too, is the get rid of this stuff when these books, including To Kill a Mockingbird, they're saying To Kill a Mockingbird might be upsetting to children, and it has there's racism in the book. It's not a racist book, but there's racism in the book. And see, I mean, we have a commenter here who's been making a lot of noise.
what's this?
This person, don't know what this is about, but this person also has said you can't just ignore race as a topic, and lots of complaints from you, but few concrete ideas.
Hmm.
And my whole channel is devoted to ideas. Now, some of them people don't like. They seem to like we must dismantle classics and we must dismantle this and dismantle that. But when I say dismantle critical race theory, get it the hell out of the classroom because it's literally hurting children and it's abusive and it's teaching a child they're bad from the inside out. They have some kind of original stain of the color of their skin. And then we're teaching a Black child, you have an original victimhood because of the color of your skin. Even if your parents are doctors, or scientists, you can never possibly succeed as much as a white person. Like, and that's somehow a good thing. And I'm saying, no, it's intrinsically a bad thing. And I would get rid of it. So that's my first solution. And my second solution is to empower parents, put the dollars with the parents, the dollars with the adults and the families, not with the school, so that more families can make these choices. I really think that school choice is a big civil rights issue. The people most hurt by not having a choice are people in minority communities. They're stuck by zip code going to a failing school.
Wow. So, and who is that? Saint.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not going to say it right. So,
So here's the thing. What you just said is fundamental, I think, because, and again, this is another anecdote experience that I've had because I think people seem to like anecdotes for some reason.
Yeah, they do.
but my elementary school was different. I don't remember a lot about, I have bits and pieces of my experience in preschool. But one of the big things that I remember is at the end of preschool when it was time for me to go to elementary, my mom put up a big fuss. I don't know. I just remember that she was working really hard to get me into this particular school.
Mm-hmm.
And that school was a magnet school. And
Right.
it was Davis Magnet. Now I think it's a Barack Obama Elementary now in Jackson, Mississippi. And my experience in that elementary is the fact that I got to, in almost every class, there were at least about 5 to 6 different races. I would not have had that experience if I went to a neighborhood school. I grew up in Verdon Addition. Verdon Addition. That was the poorest neighborhood in Jackson, Mississippi. There's no way I would have had that experience and learned how to communicate, talk to kids from all around the world. There was a girl from Taiwan. I remember there was a Jewish kid, and there was a Mexican kid in my class. And there's a girl from Senegal. So when you say school choice, I think that is one of the largest solutions because you cannot, if you grow up in a neighborhood where the school system is not up to par, mm-hmm. How is it beneficial for a child, for a parent who wants to get out of that neighborhood, to get their child out of that neighborhood? How is it beneficial to a child to force them to stay in that situation? That is a solution.
You have to ask yourself why people are so keen to do it. And because every piece of data shows that the charter schools, if we're looking at charters, for example, mm-hmm. they're more efficient, they're less expensive to run, et cetera. They're not a panacea. They're not all perfect. We learned about that on the webinar. I'm not sure you got to see it. The one that Shelby Steele did with Gabrielle Clark and Ian Rowe and Pastor Brooks. A couple weeks ago, where they talked about school choice, and they said that most of the people fighting hardest against it already have it. They have it by virtue of their income level and their position in society. And so they either are already living in a zip code with a decent school, or they're moving their kids to private schools. And so, as far as pulling money away from the public school, that's also been shown to not be true. Thomas Sowell wrote a whole book about that. That is it's just one of those tropes that will not die. Like you're going to deprive them of money, but the kid's not there. So what are you paying for? So like if the kid goes and a portion of the money you would have spent, because you don't get the whole amount, even with vouchers, if it goes with the child, you're also not enough to educate the child. And they go, yes, but the expenses are the same. And then that doesn't make sense. If your expenses are the same, no matter how many children you have in a school, then you're doing something wrong with your budgeting. There's something wrong. You don't need, and the other thing is we've grown administrators in these districts. You've got like 3 vice principals and umpteen diversity officers and all kinds of people that don't directly educate the children, and they cost a lot of money, and nobody's factoring that in. That's like a big part of the cost. But for me, all of that is academic. I leave that to the budget, number crunchers to deal with as far as how much money goes where. I'm looking at it from a civil rights standpoint. I do not see a legitimate argument in favor of consigning a child to a school in a specific zip code because zip code. To me,
It
that
doesn't make
feels
sense.
like imprisoning them in it, like it's a company town, like it's, back when somebody from on high said, you will do this and this is your life choice. And now you're telling a person who can't pay twice, people in, middle class and below, they can't pay for that education 2 times. They can't say, oh, well, there goes my tax money, but I'm going to go to private school. So it's a lot harder. Now they might be able to afford homeschool if one parent could, find another way to deal with the childcare situation or not
Mhm.
work. But to me, it's just immoral to say you don't have a choice to choose your school.
Yes.
Who are you to decide that this should be the school? And when the school is objectively failing, it's objectively failing. And then they want to turn around and blame there's not enough money. And it's like, guys, it's supposed to be a giant pot of money.
Mhm.
If you are telling me that the schools that need it most aren't getting it, then again, it resides with you to figure out how the money's distributed, not with the parents to wait for you to figure that out. Their child is growing every day. Their child needs to be educated every day. And you're saying, wait for us to figure it out over here while your child gets another year older, another year older, another year older. They're like science experiments. And I just have such a big problem with it.
Mhm.
So, and I'm getting all this from the peanut gallery, false dichotomy, false whatever. I'm not sure why you're here, what you hope to get from this conversation, but I make my agenda very clear on this channel. I am here to empower parents to make different choices for their children. I'm also here to raise awareness for people of the dangers of critical race theory. So I invited my guest to come here and talk to us because, unlike me, I think he can speak directly to the issues of the proposed solutions and whether he thinks they're right or not. I trust Quincy. If Quincy thinks that I am all wet and making no sense, he's going to tell me.
Yes, I mean, well, that comes with just critiquing ideas.
Yeah.
And if we're not, the thing is that this school choice thing, and I don't understand why it's such a, well, I do. I have my thoughts about why it's, I mean, I think that it's just not a idea that's pushed because it's not a left leaning idea. And these urban centers are run by Democrats who are in bed with teachers unions. And it's just, they're going to fight against it no matter what. So, but I don't understand why it's a political thing to have the ability to take your child and put them in whatever kind of school you want them to be in. I don't understand why and that's another thing that you mentioned in the very beginning of our conversation, is that things have become all political. We're depending on the government for a lot of our solutions, when the government should be not a player in the game, but a referee in the game. And I think a lot of people
100%.
have taken the government and made it this custodian of your life. That's not how the US was built. That's not how you accomplish anything in your life. You don't accomplish anything by having someone say, here's what I want you to do. Now, we do need the government because there are people who don't play by the rules, or there are people who are out to hurt you or get you. There are races out there. That's a real thing. But at the same time, what are the tools that you're giving people who are educating themselves? There's no tools out there that I can see, or there's no tools that are being pushed. Maybe that's the way I should put it. There are tools out there. They're just, me and you are talking about these tools.
Right.
But you won't have this conversation on CNN. You won't have this conversation on a MSNBC or a special like that. That's my issue with this.
Well, there's a huge amount of power in the teachers unions because they work for so many teachers, and the public system is so huge. And Truman and I talked about that the other day. This sort of system of incentives is not geared towards focusing on the children. And of course, my focus is on the children. And I don't think that I need to have all the answers to solve all these problems. In fact, I am not interested in saving the schools. If somebody else is interested in saving the schools and can come up with a way to do that, then knock yourself out. I'm interested in saving the kids. I'm
Mhm.
interested in
Yeah.
human lives. And what I know is this: children need to be educated. This is a fact. I just
Mhm.
take that as a given. Okay.
Uh-huh.
To order to participate in this, self-governing republic, you've got to be able to read, write, until you can vote, right? I mean, you need to be able to vote intelligently, or else people will be in power over you. Even if you're not voting, even if you choose to not participate in that process, you need to be able to engage in commerce and then make, negotiate for what you to get your needs met. And if you can't think critically and you can't write and communicate and read and do math, be numerate, people will be able to take advantage of you. So this is a survival skill in modern society, is to be educated with these basic skills. Do you need to go on to, have a college degree? Not necessarily. Do you need to have an advanced degree? Of course not. There are many ways that you can make a wonderful life for yourself with just your high school education. And that's another lie I think we've told people, is that you can. It's like, no, of course you can. About 64% of Americans don't get a college degree, and they're not all living in the gutter. So we have all kinds of people they're in the trades, they're getting certifications in various positions. So what we need to get across to kids through their parents, of course, I'm targeting the parents, the kids are not watching me, is you have more power than you know to do this job. You're better at this than you know. Your child, it is really ultimately your responsibility to educate your child, not the government's.
Yeah.
They have co-opted that job from you. They've told you it's their job, but
Mhm.
really at the end of the day, it is your job. And
Yeah.
the only person who's going to love them that much and make sure it gets done is you. Right. And so if I could just, help those people do whatever they need to do. If they feel like, now I have a voice, I'm going to the school board meetings, I feel empowered to go voice my concerns. If
Mhm.
they feel like, you know what, I think I can gather 4 or 5 families in my neighborhood and we can homeschool our kids, even though we're not of means. That's a great solution. There's not a one size fits all solution.
Yes.
Your child, your neighborhood, your community is what it is. And so I'm not really interested in that's let the think tanks figure that stuff out. I'm not interested in saving the system. I could care less for systems. I care about people.
Yes.
And this country became what it is because people, individual human beings, poured their hearts and souls into their own individual lives. And in so doing, guess what? We made a cool country. It's like, it wasn't like they all got together in a giant cluster and said, let's make a country. It's
Yeah.
like, hey, let's make a country where people are free to do their own thing. And then when they did that, a country grew up around them.
Yeah.
And I think we lost sight of that. We lost sight of, like, you're where you are because you made certain choices, right?
Mhm.
And that's another thing I want to hear from you more about. You told me on the phone about your influences,
Mhm.
because you didn't have the influence of this stuff, this critical race theory, even social justice, that wasn't really that big a deal where you were going to school, and yet you were growing up in poverty. But you said you were self-taught to a large degree in certain respects. Like, some things that you learned, you were self-taught. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
So, I mean, I would love to hear more about that, because that's the kind of empowerment I'm trying to get out there, is to let people know that all of us, myself included, I went to fancy schools, I got all these degrees, but at the end, so much of what I know is from reading. It's from my own reading, my own consumption of knowledge. And I was fortunate. I was blessed to have a few really good teachers who taught me how to think, plus my grandfather and my dad. So
Mhm.
those influences were powerful. But it was ultimately what I chose to read myself, what I chose to do with that, that gave me anything. I wouldn't be anything without that. The schools didn't do it. I did it. That's kind of
Mm.
how I feel about it. I don't know about you, but
Well, it's just a little bit of everything. I think so. Uh, I, I think the fact that I went to a magnet school, and why it's so important to expose children to other cultures, other ideas, and way of thinking, is because going to that school. I mean, when I think back, it was a great. Like, I had a great experience as a child there. But the number one thing that has stuck with me for my entire life is how I talk to people. And going back to that child that I met in the neighborhood who looked at my girlfriend like she was a alien or something. Like, if you don't expose children to other races or other ways of thinking or anything else, they will never know how to communicate. Like, I was when I went home, I was in the hood, but at the same time, when I went to school, I was interacting with like a girl from Senegal, a girl from Taiwan, it was a girl from Venezuela, a guy from Mexico, a a kid from Israel. Like I was exposed to those cultures, and they really did play that up to say like, here is the world that you live in, and that had a lot to do with when you're raised at a young age like that. It opens the world to you. You're not ISO going into middle school and going into high school. My mind was free to like, oh, I love my best friend in elementary was, I think his name was Matthew Smith. We read space books all the time. I was interested in space because I wasn't in this narrow world view that I'm a black child, and because I'm a black child, I do these specific things. And I listened to when I grew up, I listened to rap just like every other child. Like I was into Tupac and Biggie and all of that stuff, but the world was my oyster, and maybe that's just my personality. But at the same time, when you expose a kid early to a lot of different things, and give them a underlying belief system under those things, then you allow them to like the world is their oyster. But growing up, fast forward to now, digital marketing, they hardly didn't teach that in school, in colleges, and it took them. I've been doing digital marketing has been a thing for almost 20 years now. Colleges are just now coming to the idea that they need to teach digital marketing. And it isn't because the students demand it, because the students have been demanding this. It's because corporations who fund specific programs in these schools are demanding it, which is kind of that's another conversation. But the way I learned digital marketing was I found out about it in an entrepreneurship class, because it was a guy who was in his 80s, and he brought in specific people who's like, this is the stuff you're going to have to know as an entrepreneur. And someone told me the basis of SEO, and I was like, what? That is a thing? So I can know what people are searching online. I went to on Amazon, bought about 3 different books. I went to an agency. I found an agency online, contacted someone, and asked them like, "What do you do at this Google company?" And he invited me to talk. And that kind of exploratory thinking is what we need. Because if I would have stayed in the system and just like, I got my degree, now what? That I would have never had the experience of being a digital marketing out, because that's not taught. But at the same time, Google, Facebook, Bing, they have online courses where you can get a certificate. You can get these are intense courses as well. You can get a certificate without going to college. I mean, I still think you should go to college, but like you can learn all of this stuff online in books, all of that. And the next thing right now is cryptocurrency and the blockchain. And it will probably be another 20 years before colleges catch up to that. And think about those people who are in college, they're not teaching kids any of this stuff or telling them that this is the future. So it's kind of a thing where I think our education system is quickly getting behind the 8 ball when it comes to this stuff. I hate to say it, but that's what I see.
Right. Exactly. And I think what you said about being able to go to that magnet school is a pretty big deal, because that's what gave you that worldview, that focus, that like the world was beyond your neighborhood and so forth, and that was your mom in a way exercising her choice. Granted, it had to be in a lottery system and so forth, but imagine if she didn't have to go through that of, what if you didn't get in? You know what I mean? Like what if you didn't draw your number? Wow. So that's what breaks my heart, is like I see these little kids, hopefully, they're sitting there hopefully, oh, is it going to be me going to the school? And then they don't get picked. And it's just gut wrenching, because in your heart that could make the big difference in their life, is being able to go to a school like that. And so and it's still a public school. I still have my issues with public schools, but here's my thinking is if there were more competition, that even they would improve. It's just not my area of focus. My area of focus isn't on telling those people how to fix their problem. I'm a mom, so I know how to be a mom. I mean, like I've homeschooled my kids and put my kids in school, so I know how to do that. So I think I'll stick to what I know best, and like I said, I'll leave the rest to other people who know better. But from where I sit, if there's a parent out there saying this isn't right and my kid's not learning, they're not achieving, and then there's the gap, and we come back to where we started. There's an achievement gap, and people are saying we need to change names on buildings in San Francisco, 44 buildings. We got to change names on the buildings. We've got to put this critical race theory in the classroom, teach Black Lives Matter curriculum about how the nuclear family is about white supremacy, capitalism is evil, all these things. How do you think that will close the achievement gap? Can it close the achievement gap to be spending even a minute on this stuff? Never mind that I think it's toxic. I mean, I personally think it's bad psychologically for these children, but from a practical standpoint, do you think that this helps anybody in those communities?
It does help someone. It helps politicians.
Or the people selling the book, you know? So.
No, I'm really trying to be objective here and think of how that would help someone close the achievement gap. If I'm trying to achieve, and maybe I'm and like I said, I'm not on here trying to speak out for the Black community or whatever.
No, but
my personal experience, and that's just me. But like, I want to achieve, like, my whole day. If I don't achieve anything, then I'm going to play Halo and like win a game and say, I achieved something. So that's my life. Right. But as far as, no, like taking down statues, BLM is kind of a touchy subject for me because I mean, how could I not have any kind of affinity for them? But the nuclear family, and again, I grew up in a single parent home. I saw how hard it was for my mom to raise 2 boys.
Right.
It's hard. And I know people right now who are raising kids without a father in the home. What that produces, and I just started my YouTube channel. I brought receipts. It's on YouTube. So
awesome.
I had a conversation with a friend of mine, a close friend of mine. We've been friends all our lives. And we both were raised in single parent homes. And one of the things that we discussed was that when you don't feel it as a child and growing up, but when you get in your 30s or mid 30s, you're like, there's all these life decisions that I have to make that I'm like, I didn't have a father to like run that by, or I didn't have an example. I didn't have an example of what not to do. I didn't have an example of what to do. And especially with relationships and finance. And to think that Black Lives Matter, and they took it off their website. I remember the day they did it, when they were saying they want to disrupt the nuclear family. I'm like, on what planet is that the right idea? Like, why? I don't, it just makes no sense whatsoever. Okay. But not only that, what does that have to do about improving Black lives? Like,
well, it's still in the curriculum. So just this month, of course. Yeah. So this month, because it's Black History Month, they had the first week of the month was Black Lives in School week. Was the first week of the month in many schools that adopted the curriculum. And they had it available for download at various school districts where they were doing it. So I went to their Google Docs. I mean, it was like out there publicly to see. So it's not like I was pulling it from some right-wing website. I was pulling it directly from the Google Docs that they were using because they have to make this stuff publicly available. And in this one school, and I did a video about it showing them with the 3rd grade, what they're basically having for like 3rd through 5th grade. And I'm thinking, why are you teaching 3rd graders that the nuclear family of a 2-parent household is a bad thing, like an objectively, like it's a fact, not just First of all, I don't think it's debatable that it's that it's good. We know from the data that it's good. Okay. That does that. And people misinterpret. People think that means that you judge someone who doesn't have a family that's a nuclear family. No, you can be a humane, decent person. I came from my dad was a single parent. So you can be, look at people and treat everybody the same. You can say no judgment whatsoever. You didn't do this to yourself, whatever. You could love people and have compassion for people and still acknowledge the fact that it would be better, that statistically it helps out, that the income of the family is higher, the amount of attention that either parent has to give to the child, etc. You don't need to pass judgment to decide that something is an okay thing. And here it's almost like they've just put it right there for the lesson for a third grader. And that just blows my mind. Like, why does a third grader even need to be discussing this? If you want to have that conversation in a college classroom, I can maybe understand it. Like, you want to have a conversation about it, but I don't see why you teach it to a third grader as if it's like a thing they need to embrace, accept as fact, and now move on. Because they're not going to question. Third graders are not going to go, "Excuse me, I disagree. That's not correct." It's not going to happen.
Well, it's baffling to me. I'm trying to figure out how can that improve anything? Because if I've been through enough relationships in my life where I understand that me being raised by a woman, that comes with certain things that I don't have examples of what a man would do in certain type of situations. And even what I've heard from psychologists is weird, because if I was a woman who was raised in a single parent home, you're missing that father figure. You're missing then your dating becomes weird. And to teach that, even the aspect of, let's say that you teach a black male child that so he's not going to aspire to be a father to his kids. There's nothing about this that makes sense.
I just don't. And at the end of the day, I don't understand how it does two important things. One, I don't understand how it helps the child feel better about him or herself. Okay, if that's the goal. Okay. And the second thing is, I don't see how it improves the fundamental skills that they're supposed to be learning in these grades.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we still need to be concerned with teaching an 8-year-old how to read and helping them have a lot of practice reading and reading a variety of different materials so they can improve their vocabulary. So maybe that sounds incredibly old fashioned to people, but third graders don't debate. Third graders they don't debate. I'm sorry. I've taught debate. Third graders, maybe gifted third graders, but 8-year-olds have arguments. And they're not fights. They contradict each other. They don't debate because they can't, they just, you're asking the brain of an 8-year-old to do something the brain of an 8-year-old is not developed yet enough to do. And that's brain science. That's not my opinion. And so you need to be first concerned with things like, how's the reading going? How much do you love learning? I mean, if I could, get across to parents that the number one job of elementary school is love learning. Just get your kid to feel like learning is a cool thing and it's the key to everything, right? Whatever you're learning, it doesn't have to be specific to a subject. And that the tools of learning are language. I mean, language is one of the tools that we use in modern society to learn. It's not the only way, but it's a big way, right? We can use pictures, we can use video, we can use a lot of different things. But even if you're watching a video, there's words, right? People are speaking. Mm-hmm. So communication is really important. I just am concerned that the focus on race is not a constructive one. It's not that I'm saying don't ever talk about it. In fact, I think there are good ways. I'm going to have somebody on next week who does diversity, equity, inclusion training very differently and has a compassion model where, you approach it from a completely different point of view, not the oppressed model. Mm-hmm. More that, we all have our issues and we all have our biases, and that the way we need to interact with people is to be to be compassionate about the person in front of us, and also understand what kind of things are going on inside of us that might not be so healthy, that could be impacting our communication. So you're looking inside yourself, you're looking also at the person right in front of you, and trying not to prejudge, but also being aware of, like, I had this bad experience and that might make me more inclined to prejudge somebody. So I better be careful. And that's true for all humans. Like, we all have stuff, right? We've all had things in our lives that could make us, hesitant, fearful, whatever, or not. Maybe we had a charmed life and, like, we don't feel that way. So we're very open. But the point is, there's a different way to go about this. No one is saying, don't do it at all. Pretend everything is fine. Pretend everybody gets along. I would be the last person to say that. I just think there's a better way. And I don't think this is the good way to do it.
Well, the thing about it, I think now I could be wrong, but I think the idea about this is like to have compassion, or like be care about another person's situation. But it's not, it's all performative. It's not empathetic. It's not about, it's surface level stuff. We can teach a child. I think that children automatically learn about being empathetic and being caring when they deal. And something else you said on the phone that I thought about, and that was that it's confusing children. They grow up confused because if you're learning, I think David Brooks, I think he was a person who quoted that quote about, like, I have the power to make the future better than the present. He has a book, I believe, called Social Animal. I think that's the name of it. And it basically discusses how children learn from an early age. They learn by playing and playing with other children. And if you teach them, they learn what they're learning when they're playing with other children. But if you teach them that it sounds like there's some kind of social ideology about how to view the child who doesn't have a father. If you teach them stuff like that, I can see it can be very confusing, because you're learning one thing from how you're interacting with your environment, and then you're going to a classroom. And I think that's I'm confused right now, because I learn things in my environment, and I go to a classroom, and they're like, oh, you're oppressed and all. I'm like, you're not making any sense. Like, I don't walk down the street and be hunted by people. Like, I feel when I go to the hood, maybe I need to, like, make sure I'm checking my surroundings of someone trying to rob me, but I don't automatically think that the police are just going to run up and shoot me. Like, that's not my real life experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Confusing. It's confusing. And I think when adults tell you things that don't match your experience, and you don't have the ability to contradict them.
Yes. Wow.
So you don't really, like, the problem with that third grader is, I still maintain a third grader can't debate, but whatever, apparently somebody disagrees with me. But a third grader, it's a rare third grader that has the stones to stand up or raise their hand in the class and say, hey, teacher, you're wrong. This, I'm not oppressed. I don't feel this. My best friend, is white, or whatever. Like, it doesn't, or my dad is white. Okay. Like, it's like, my mom is white. I'm a biracial child. You just look at me and you see a black child. Like, they're not going to, typically, again, there might be a child. I don't want to generalize, because somebody's going to say, no, I know a kid who would do that. Okay, awesome. Fantastic. I'll say on average, they're not going to just argue with the teacher. And I feel pretty confident saying that, because I've watched video of people taking critical race theory based white fragility training at their company and sitting there patiently, calmly, just listening to how bad they are, instead of going, I am out of here. And I'm watching these people, like, is your desire not to offend so profound that you are going to sit and let people talk to you in ways that are not true? And so to tell me, like, oh no, the 8-year-old, the 9-year-old, the 10-year-old is just going to be like, this is whack, I'm out. They're not. They're just not. They don't go home and tell their parents that the teacher abused them. And there are teachers that abuse kids. They verbally abuse them. They call them stupid. Kids who are special needs, especially. Sherman was just talking about that the other day. There are kids who get verbally abused, or the kids abuse the child and then the teacher eggs them on. I've seen it with my own eyes.
Are you serious?
I'm dead serious. And so it's the kids don't go home and say anything unless they're, again, a special kind of kid, but the average kid just doesn't, and the parent has no clue. So this idea that we would know about it, it's like, no, you don't assume you would always know about it, and don't assume the kid is going to push back. So they sit in a classroom listening to this over and over and over. You're oppressed, you're oppressed, you're oppressed. You're a victim, you're oppressed. You're a victim, you're oppressed. After a point, they got two choices. Either they think the adult is an idiot, and they don't trust a word out of this person's mouth, and they don't get much out of school because they're like, okay, whatever. And they're sitting there just letting this lunacy like pass over them and not say anything. It's a waste of their time. Best case scenario, it's a waste of their time because they're not learning something valuable to them. They're not learning at their pace. They're just putting up with this nonsense and thinking the teacher's an idiot. Or they do believe it. They do think the teacher knows what they're talking about. They internalize it, and this becomes their worldview. I don't see an upside here. I'm not seeing like how this can be resolved in a good way. And most importantly, I don't see how this messaging helps anyone. Like, I keep asking people, where's your data, Robin DiAngelo? Where's your data, Ibram X. Kendi? And when the guy is sitting there when the guy is sitting there saying, wouldn't it be great if we could have conversations about race with children before they're even capable of understanding it? There's literally a video where he says that. I'm not making this up. I made a video where I recorded it. It's on the library. Like, there's like a library website about his book, Anti-Racist Baby. And there he is with his little, hi, everybody. This is why I wrote the book. And he literally says, wouldn't it be great if we could have conversations about race with children before they could even understand them? And he's got a big smile. And I'm sitting there like, no, that would be terrible. Why would you do that? You are literally indoctrinating. And for every person who's ever said, you shouldn't tell a child what to believe. You should let them, arrive at their own beliefs for religion. If you think it's indoctrination to say, believe in God and you will listen or you're going to hell. If you think that's not okay because they're just a little child and they can argue with you, why is this okay? Why is this one okay and that one's not okay? How about they're both not okay? How about that?
It goes back to narcissism, like, because like who are let's black and white people to say that their issue, like I'm thinking about my elementary school experience. Like, what if they would walk in a classroom and teach critical race theory then to a room full of like 6, 7 different races? Like, so what about the girl from Taiwan or Venezuela? What do they have to do with this? Like,
exactly.
It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
No, it sure doesn't.
But if you're a postmodernist, and I know a lot of people don't know what that means, it's like it rejects the fact that there is a overarching idea for everyone, for the human race. It rejects that mentality. So I guess everyone else will just sit quietly in the corner, and the white kids and black kids just learn, who's oppressed and who's not. Like, I don't know. It doesn't make any kind of sense to me.
I froze. I froze. I'm like, I'm frozen. I don't know what happened.
The timer's still going, and
yeah. Okay, hang on. I'm gonna try something. I don't know if this is camera's still on. I wonder what happens if I like stop it and start it. Did that fix it?
No, you froze in a different way now.
Well, that's fantastic. Oh my God. I'm like totally frozen. I don't know. Let's see. How about I tried to stop the camera and now it's acting weird.
You stopping and starting your camera?
Yeah, I did that. And it's like, I tried that a couple times. I can't think of what else to do except maybe yep, it's still stuck. It's totally still stuck.
And this is the camera on your laptop?
Yeah, it was working perfectly fine until a second ago. Hang on.
Must have been like what?
Yeah, it's just totally frozen. I'm going to refresh. I'll come back, hopefully.
Okay. All right. Let's read some of these. Stop teaching critical.
Am I back?
Yep, you're back.
Whoa.
So do you have like, I hear a lot, now this is my first stream, right? So do you have like what you call super chats or something? Like, is that a
I
thing?
have to be to do super chats, you have to be monetized, and I don't have enough I have enough viewers or enough subs, but I don't have enough I don't have enough viewing hours. Like people haven't watched enough hours of my videos, probably because I'm
Oh, well,
boring
you
or
gotta get
something.
those numbers up.
But yeah, and then we could do super chats. I was bummed because I wanted to do them and then take like money and donate it and stuff. But because like with this one, for example, I was thinking like it would be cool to do some donations, like especially when Gabrielle comes on. I want to make sure people donate to her legal fund
Oh,
for that.
Gab,
Yeah,
she was on the
the
Project
web.
Good.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
And they're going to court. They're going to have their day in court. Their argument against the defendant's motion to, dismiss it or whatever, that was, they won that argument, and the judge says they will hear it in court, that they believe that it will succeed on the merits.
Oh, that's
So, and see, her son is a classic example of somebody who was abused by this type of training. So, but that's, I don't want to spend too much time on that. I was more
okay.
curious to hear from you about like your personal experiences going from living in Mississippi,
Hmm.
going to Chicago, and it's sort of like the opposite of what people would imagine, that where you were growing up in poverty, single parent household, etc., but you still weren't exposed to any of the social justice, like
No.
people trying to fix you, help you, tell you you're oppressed or any of that. I'm like green, I don't know why, but that wasn't happening. And then you went to Chicago, where you're living surrounded by white people in your college, in your neighborhood, and they're all like, Quincy, you're so oppressed. Quincy, we need to help you. You're oppressed, man. And you're like, and it sounds to me like you're going, what? I'm not oppressed.
I was shocked that like it was such a ingrained thought. It was almost like, I don't know, like I was speaking another language, like I'm supposed to just be this angry black man or something. And like that's really not my demeanor. Like I came here to like do some things, and it's not join your political movements.
Right.
Like it's, but that's, I mean, that's the thing. I think it's ingrained in this culture. It's become sort of a campus culture. So, and it's mainstream now, I think.
What do you think would be, because, in terms of constructive type solutions and things um, that would be more helpful, it like with the achievement gap, for example, what do you think is missing? What do you think would be better for people to be having conversations about in terms of that?
So, number one, and I think number one, it's going to be we have to make, and I think that with COVID-19 and what's going on with the pandemic and children not being in school, that we have to make learning outside of schools. I'm trying to think of the word to describe it, like legitimize it or make it something that's common, learning outside of schools, because we live in an information age, and I think people haven't wrapped their heads around that.
Hmm.
Information is being decentralized.
Hmm.
Universities and colleges, they are not the centers of, they're the centers of, they're becoming more like, I wrote this in one of my pieces. I think that universities and colleges are becoming more like a combination of church and state. It's a cathedral of critical race theory. Like,
It's so funny you said that. I call it expensive church.
yeah,
Really, really, really expensive church. It's like Scientology without the aliens.
yes. Well, the thing about it, like when I said like I wanted to learn about urban geography, I'm like excited about this stuff, and no, that wasn't what it was about. It was, I had another law class, and the guy just came there. He's just like, all he did was talk about his political stuff. Like that's little. He didn't like. I mean, he taught us a little bit, but it wasn't that much. It was mostly about like his woke stuff. And So
So
I
this
think
is even in the Obama administration. So the Obama administration is when you were in college, right? Or when is that roughly around the time 2008, or were you out of college by
the
then?
election for Obama, I think his first term was was 2008, I
Right.
think. Um,
Yeah.
so it was during Obama administration. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's important to note because a lot of people who are just sort of realizing all the stuff that's going on now post George Floyd have thought that it was because of George Floyd, that somehow that this might have been
No.
percolating, but that George Floyd was
No.
like the catalyst. And I've
No.
been trying to tell people, like, where have you been? Like, what rock have you been living under? This has been going on a really long time. It's been in colleges, it's been in school. Like I said, I graduated in 1987, and there was already like, down with the whatever, Reagan is a Nazi and all these kinds of things, and it was already there. It was
It
already
was
there.
already there. And
Yeah.
well, that goes back to I think that people have to educate themselves. Self-education has to be promoted. It has to be pushed some kind of way. I know that TV is not going to do it. I know that the mainstream sources are not going to do it because it decentralizes their power. Um, because everything you need to know about the world is on the internet. I'm sorry, that's what it is. And there's thousands and thousands of courses out there to teach anyone anything.
It's so true.
And I think we have to decentralize. I think that's going to be the first step, because if you're in poverty and you're in the hood, let's say you can't buy all these books. That's another thing. My mom had a lot of books. She probably didn't read them all, but she had a lot of books, and she made sure I was reading at a really young age because she always read to us. And it wasn't like this was like, oh, I'm putting Quincy to bed. She was like, no, you're going to read this thing. I'm going to teach you how to read myself. Like, that's how
That's
she.
great though. But that's what I'm trying to say to people is like, you are your child's teacher. You
Yeah.
can do this. You don't sell yourself short.
Yeah.
And it's you just reading to a child is a gift. It's such a gift to read to a
Yeah.
child. It really is.
Well, she bought me like us World Book encyclopedias, but like she was in poor, like she didn't have all the money in the world, but she invested in that. But even if you can't invest in that, you can invest in internet. Like, how much does it cost? $15 a month? Like, all this
I
stuff
mean,
is online.
right.
All of this
It's
stuff.
online. And I think the missing component that we really do struggle with is we've we've dismantled the community in such a way, that it's kind of a weird thing with the focus on grouping people and collectivism and all this kind of stuff. You would think we would have more community, but what I notice is where people feel better about being an individual, they are more integrated in their community. So in other words, if you
Yes.
see individuals and you see yourself as an individual, you go out in your neighborhood, you're like, oh, an individual person that I might want to know and say hello to. You don't see them as like an avatar for people, right? You see them
Mhm.
as like Quincy and Deb and hey, how's it going? And because we're sort of either looking to groups to solve problems, looking at government to solve problems, looking at entities to solve problems, as opposed to just thinking I got personal power and I can solve my own problem, I can make friends, whatever. The one thing that I think people are struggling with isn't so much they think it's that they don't have the chops to teach the kid the skills, but
Mhm.
that's because the internet. That's actually the easy part. The hard part, I think,
Oh,
is
yes.
replacing what they think they have in the school, but they don't actually have, which is community.
Yes.
You don't really get community in a school. Community it's a fake community. It's arbitrary. It's like all the people of this age are going to sit in this one room, and then we're going to assign you an adult, and you don't have a say in who that adult is. And if you really don't get along with them and don't like them, you can't leave. You're stuck in that room all year with an adult that doesn't understand you, and maybe you don't understand them, and it's not working out, and it's a big problem. And too bad, so sad. It was a number draw. We don't tell you how we assign these things. We just do it. And then same thing with the kids. Maybe half of those kids are like want to hurt you, but you can't get away. You're stuck there. So is that community, or is it more a little bit like fancy, like a prison you get to leave at the end of the day? So I don't, and I know people criticize me for saying that, but I don't know a better analogy. It doesn't feel like community. And even John Taylor Gatto says it's not really community. So the socialization you get in there it's something, but it's not the kind that is actually makes you a functional person in the outside world. That comes from who you interact with outside of that building. The kids you play with, whether in your neighborhood or because you met them at school and went home and played with them at home or their home. You met them at the park, or you were out with your moms and you saw different people and said, hey, or you went to your grandparents or your cousins or something like that. That's your community. And we don't have that very well. And of course, now what I've been really sad about with COVID is now we add this layer of people are afraid of people, like legit, like they're like, I'm afraid of you. You might make me sick has been a new component added on top of the layers of, I'm afraid you might snatch my child. I'm afraid you might be a predator. I'm afraid you're a total stranger. I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of that. So we're living now in a type of world where the solution is going to be harder to adopt because we have to drop some of these fears, a lot of which, by the way, are not grounded in reality. Like the fear that your child's going to be imminently kidnapped. That's actually not grounded in data. That's a lot less likely to happen than people seem to think. They can go to the park with another kid, maybe not when they're 3, but certainly when they're 10, they probably can. So this is, I think you can, as you pointed out, the classes, the knowledge, all the stuff you'd get at school, you could get on the internet, and you can get some socializing. But there's no substitute for face-to-face interaction, right? I mean, kids especially need to play, need to run around and need to play face-to-face with each other. And that's how they develop their negotiating skills, their social skills, their, what's going to be okay, what their boundaries are, what they'll tolerate, what they won't tolerate. And a lot of people say, well, that's why we need them back in the schools. And my argument there is like, I know it seems like that, but I still feel like that's not going to really solve the problem. I don't think that's going to solve it.
Well, you mentioned something that was fascinating to me is that you mentioned that there were some communities of parents who were homeschooling their children. Like,
yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think that could play a part into it as well. Like homeschooling children, but handling that social aspect of it with other parents that are on the same page.
Exactly, like co-ops and pods and things, and yeah, and I think the beauty of social media is it gives you a tool with which to communicate with those other families, like to go out and find them. Put in your location and wherever you live, type in Chicago or whatever neighborhood, anybody homeschooling or anybody meeting it for co-op or something, and you'd be amazed what comes up. But that's why, like I said, with my channel, what I'm trying to do is let more parents know, if you could find that, if you could take those steps and you could find those people, you could do this. And I ran a poll on this channel. I set up a poll about a week ago to ask people, if you're waiting for your school to open and your kid is at home and you're not happy with things, what stops you from just switching to homeschooling, like to doing it yourself? And I was actually surprised. I expected it to be like 90% I have to work. It was actually down to like 54% I have to work is the number one reason. And the next highest reason is I don't think I'd be good at it. It's like 21% or something. And that kind of made me sad because I think parents really underestimate themselves. And that's in part because the school and the teachers unions, everybody have sent them that message. You need experts, you need us, whatever. Now, with some children, that may be the case. Children with special needs and stuff, you may need extra help. But so much of it is loving the child and being there for the child. And when a child feels happy and secure, when they feel like they can, that they're capable, they're natural learners. Kids, I believe, are born wanting to gobble up, new information. And it's how we learn to walk, talk, eat, sleep, everything we do up until we're of school age. We learn from our parents. We learn from the people around us. We learn just by trial and error, right? Get up, fall down, get up again. So when you're supported through that and you feel like you can, that feeling will take you very far. Even if your parent themselves doesn't have a college degree, even if, they're telling you like, look, I don't know math all that well, but here, this looks like a really good way to learn math and let's go online and figure it out together. If you're communicating to the child, you can do this. I have faith in you. You're a big part of the way there. I think. Maybe I'm just an idealist, but I just feel like parents don't believe in themselves enough, and they should
Well,
believe in themselves more.
maybe a large part of this is that people don't have the desire to learn that much. Because if you, let's say that you're in that situation where you're a parent that doesn't didn't graduate from college and you've never picked up a book in your life, and
Right.
to ask you to do that with your child is can be intimidating, like anything else in life. Very, very intimidating, and you just outsource it. So I think that may be a huge issue for a lot of people that, even if you didn't have to teach them yourself, you would still have to like check behind their work online or something like that. And I think a lot of people aren't up to the task of learning at all, not even from themselves or anything. And I think that's going to be a huge,
That is really sad.
yeah. I mean,
I mean, there's not much that people can do, to fix that. But I do think, if to the extent that people are out there who do want to learn or do want their kids to learn, I guess
mhm,
my message is you can do a lot more than you think you can. And
yes.
then secondarily, it would be, if you really feel like you can't, then your next step should be fighting hard for school choice, because the people out there who can help you are there. They're there, but you need to have the right to go find them. It's to go
Yeah.
to take yourself and your kid and go find the people that you would align with, that you think like, okay, I don't feel like I can do this, but that school over there on the other side of town that I read about, or that somebody told me about, or my kid's friend is going to, or they have good marks in the school report cards or whatever, I want to try that out. Like, that should be the next step. So it's kind of like a tiered approach. Like, if you really feel like I gotta have school, then I would say to that person, fight for school choice, because then you have a better chance of getting a school that will serve your needs at least.
You know what's horrifying? The fact that I have no idea about like how magnet schools work. And you told me that there was a lottery, and like if I didn't get chosen, I would have went to another school. That's
Usually
how
magnet
that
schools are a lottery school, so your mom would have had to put your name on a list, and then they do a drawing and your name comes up, and or it doesn't.
are you
And if it
serious?
Yeah, you don't just go, generally speaking. Now, maybe it's different in Jackson, but in
I
Chicago, as an example, and in Boston and here in Charlotte, if you wanted to go, like, even the school that my kids went to, that was a charter,
hmm
they had a lottery in there. I couldn't just choose it. I had to put their names in the lottery. Now, I got kind of lucky because the school was brand new. So a
hmm
lot of people don't want to try a school when it's brand new. And so we got in, but then once it was around for a while and I wanted to get my youngest daughter in because her sister was already there, then that was really popular and her number was like way down. There was a sibling, slight sibling benefit to it, but it didn't, was still touch and go. And then she got in there. And of course, it turned out to not be so great because, as I said before, our charter schools are not a panacea. They're good ones, like anything else, are good ones, and they're not so good ones. Now, I know that Ian Rowe, who was on that same webinar with Shelby Steele, he's creating a series of charter schools, which I have no doubt will be fabulous because he is who he is. And when you get good people and you get people who have the right philosophy and the right ideas about education, and they're really committed to it, I
hmm
think you're going to have a good result. So I would just encourage people, like, really dig deep into what it is, what's their basic philosophy of education, what are they going to do there, and so forth. But yeah, it's a lottery thing. So you probably went through that and didn't even know it. Your mom might have had some sleepless nights, I don't know. But
Just to think that my education is up to the lottery. Wow,
yeah,
that
and
is fascinating.
they've televised some of these, and I've watched a few of them, and I just want to cry because you see the little kids sitting there, like, with their parents all hopeful, and when their number doesn't get called, they have to go back home, and then they know they're going to the school that they obviously didn't want to go to. And when I see that, and then people make arguments about their lives, they're not individuals, they're talking about them like they're a theory, like they're in the abstract. And I'm
hmm
like, please look at this mom, like Ian Rowe talks about, that 22-year-old mom with the 5-year-old son. Why shouldn't she have as much opportunity to, even if she doesn't have the greatest education, to get her son the best he could possibly get if it's not in the school in the neighborhood which she can afford? And I want somebody to look at her in the eye and tell her why she can't have that, why the money can't follow the child, or why you can't have more charters, or both. Let's have more choice. Now, again, we get a comment about much ado about little. In this comments, schools need reform, but CRT is the least of the problems. Guess what? I agree with you. CRT is the least of the problems, but that tells you how big the other problems are, because CRT is a big problem. CRT is nothing good. So if you're taking nothing good and you're adding it onto a system that has problems that are the bigger problems, now you have a really big problem. And part of why you have a really big problem is if you try to leave CRT out of it, even if I don't touch that, and I say, can we talk about the way we are changing, grades, or the way we're dealing with teaching kids to read that is not addressing dyslexia? Can we talk about this? Racist, you're racist. It's become the go-to boogeyman to talk about any issues. You want to talk about, can we talk about discipline in the classroom? Racist. So the reason it matters is that once you allow this poison into the discussion of critical race theory, which is every disparity equals racism, how am I going to address the bigger problems? And when I say I mean like any person who wants to do it. I'm just a person sitting on the internet. I don't matter. But the people who are out there actually doing the work, the ones I'm talking about, though, I'm just a conduit for information to people who maybe aren't aware of it, trying to get them to go look into it more. That's it. That's literally my sole purpose. Okay. Is to raise awareness and get people empowered to go do things on their own. I don't have the solution. There isn't the solution, but I agree. CRT is the least of the problems, which tells you how big the other problems are. That's what, in my opinion, that's.
Well, Thomas Sowell, one quote that he said was, "There's no solutions, only trade-offs." And
yes,
that's a bit tough for a lot of people. The woke crowd won't agree with that because they're looking for the utopia. So
there's only trade-offs. Nothing is a perfect solution. And what's interesting is that he learned that from photography, because he's a photographer.
Yeah.
And it's always that way. You can get a little better focus, but then your depth of field is off or whatever. And it's kind of the same here, especially when you have a mass system run by government that has to, by law, treat everybody equally. Well, we hope. They're trying to change that. Then you have a problem, because it's incredibly difficult to take, let's say, typical high school, like the one in our city. It's 4,000 kids. How you don't even have equality in that school, never mind equity. Okay. So if you're going to think you're going to get equity in a place that doesn't even have equality of opportunity,
I've never thought about that before.
Good luck. Then you don't, because here's how I know that. You have 4,000 kids. They said to my daughter, she filled out her registration form of what she wanted to take to, set her high school career in motion, because she wanted to have her transcript come out with, I want to take my language right up front, get it out of the way. Then I want to take all my other classes when, I'm been in the school longer, I'm older. They said, nope, you can't have language this year because there's just no room in the class. We only have, 2 teachers or 1 teacher. So you're going to have to wait. And, and by the way, we don't have any space in any core classes being math, history, science. So we're going to front load your schedule with your electives. So she was putting off until sophomore year things that were freshman classes because the school said so. And so that's not equal. She didn't have the equal opportunity to build her transcript that would tell colleges what she did and what she learned, that because somebody else decided it. Somebody decided based on some formula we don't know. We'll never know. And now as a junior, she's struggling through trying to get through her Latin 2, because she took Latin 1 in middle school. She could have gone right into freshman year and done Latin 2 and then been done.
Yeah.
But because she had a whole year and a summer in between, she forgot everything. She took the placement test, had to go back and redo level 1 again. So, and people might sit there and go, oh, poor lady, white tears. Okay, fine. But No, I'm serious. I get shit like this, okay? But this is her schedule. Everything has changed because of what some adults sitting in a room decided about what she should have based on what they needed. Like, we don't have room, sorry. And it's a 4,000 kid school.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's literally like the amount of money that school has from boosters and everything else, a public school, but it gets constant grief about it's such a rich school. It's such a rich school. They bus kids. They now have like, I think 35 or 40% of the kids are bussed in from outside the neighborhood to achieve racial equity, racial diversity. And so they're not at 50-50, but they're close. They're getting close to being, where they're getting to have parity. But they have a lot of money. I mean, the school itself, part of why they agree to do that is they do have more money. And I'm thinking, okay, but why you can't, there's trailers. The kids are going to school in trailers. They don't have a building space to put them all, but they've got, I think, 3 vice principals. They got, all these administrators, diversity officers, all kinds of 6-figure salary people working at the school. And the kids are in a trailer.
Why can't they just divide? I mean, this may be a basic question, but why can't they just split the kids up if that's into different schools if they're not?
It's a very good question. It's a valid question. And some people have talked about that. Like, shouldn't we decentralize some of these school districts and have them, instead of being consolidated, have them be smaller so that you can do these things? And I've never heard a good answer. But what I know is that this idea that you have equality as it is false. It isn't there. And it's for all the kids. I'm sure there's some, kid who's a minority who didn't get what they wanted on their schedule either. So to me, equality means that you got to choose. You had the same choices someone else had. And I'm sorry, no one is going to persuade me that the children who are the children of those administrators or the children of the PTO members or the children of the big boosters of the school, even if it is a public school, no one is going to persuade me that they didn't have an in to get their schedule as they wanted it. Because that's how things work. We know that's how things work in this world. I can't prove it, but I would be willing to bet that that's the case because just anecdotally, I saw, and my daughter told me, she goes, it's interesting that the principal's kid at all the right, like all the classes. So there's not equality as it is. And now you want to tell me you're going to have equity, meaning equal outcomes? The only way to do that is just fudge the numbers. That's the only way to do it. Is just be like, let's erase some F's. They didn't happen. Look, we're equal now.
This makes me scared to be a parent. I mean, because I have a friend who had he was a parent. I think his child is like 3 or 4, and he was in Chicago and he moved to Charlotte. A big part of the reason why they moved was something to do with the school system.
Right.
And I forgot what it was, but it was a whole thing. And I'm like, this is serious. If you have people that are controlling the lives of the life and the outcomes of your children, like it's very weird.
Well, when I moved here, one of the things that I was told by the realtor saying it, was so great is they said, there's so much school choice. And I said, oh, really? Oh, yeah, there's a language school. And then there's, there's a school that specializes in STEM. And and it's true. These are like how the magnet school was that you went to. So there are magnets. There's a magnet system in Charlotte that you can do the lottery. And they're all different kinds of specialized programs. There's IB schools, international baccalaureate schools, and so on. And a lot of people want to be in those. They want to be in the IB schools because they think, this is a more academically rigorous program. And it is. So that's a big draw for people. But then I don't think they realize that when they get here, the competition for those slots is intense. So if you're kind of banking on my kid's going to get one of those, that's probably, I wouldn't say it's not going to happen. Someone does, people win lotteries, but to move yourself 1,000 miles or something for it, I would say is a high risk. The other thing is that increasingly what we're learning, especially now with the movement of this social justice stuff into the schools, is that those differentiators are getting watered down because the differentiators compete with the equity goals. So, just like in some cities, they're doing away with the schools that are the high achieving schools, the school where you have to take a test to get in for math or whatever. They're doing away with the tests. They're doing away with the schools altogether in some places, like in Boston. And so if you have a school that has a lottery system and it's perceived to be more academically rigorous or better, and so it's attracting a lot of people, and then the other school starts losing people, you might see the similar trend here where people say we can't have that anymore because of equity. It's interfering with the achievement of equity because somebody has something special that somebody else doesn't have. Now, I can't predict for sure that that's going to happen, but I certainly wouldn't relocate myself on the basis of it because it may not last, and it's not what it's cracked up to be. Like I said, I mean, what my eldest daughter lotteried into an IB school for middle school. And honestly, the main reason I did it was down the street from the house and she would be able to walk.
Yeah.
Whereas to those middle school that she was zoned for was on the other side of town.
Yeah.
And that struck me as kind of bizarre that you're going to send a kid on a bus for, 45 minutes to go to a school that when there's a school down the street. So we've had people run for local office here who were very much about changing the school to neighborhood schools. And he lost. And in part because there's a lot of momentum against that. And I'm just like, why would you be against a neighborhood school? Shouldn't kids want to go to school in their neighborhood? And I mean, to your point, you want to go to school with a diverse range of students so you can see how the real world works. But I feel like there's other solutions to achieve that while still keeping kids from riding buses all over the place. It takes a lot of their time that they could be getting to know people in their neighborhood and they could be making friends and getting fresh air and stuff and not sitting on a bus. It seems like a lot of time. And they're tired. Then they're tired, they get home. So, but as far as you say, you think you're afraid to have kids. Having kids is scary, period. But where you send them to school ought not be the scary thing. That's like, I guess that's my message for parents is that if that does scare you, fight for school choice and or familiarize yourself before you have kids with the homeschooling stuff and think about how you could do it, would do it, marry somebody who agrees with you.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, it's a big problem.
Wow.
But yeah, that's a big issue. I mean, not everybody agrees. Some people are they're like, my kid will be weird. And I'm thinking like, do you think what? I think what they're reacting to, sadly, is that a lot of kids are homeschooled because when they go to school, the ways that they're different get rejected by, school is one of those places where conforming is really important. And that's like the social structure of it. So if you don't conform and you're a little different than other kids, maybe you're on the spectrum or whatever, or maybe you just have different interests and you get bullied. Some of those kids are the ones that get pulled out to be homeschooled. So then people see that kid and go, well, homeschoolers are weird. And it's like, thank you for calling a child. You just did what happened to them in school. You adult just judge them the same way the kids in school judge them, which is why they went home to be homeschooled. So think twice before you say stuff, because first of all, homeschoolers are not any more of a monolith than, white people, black people, whatever. I mean, it's like, there's no one thing called homeschool anyway. It's not one thing. It's a lot of different things. But anyhow, what did we not cover? I feel like we covered a lot of stuff, but what else would you like to say to this few people who are gathered around us right now?
Yeah, how are they doing this?
I don't know. We got like 13 people now.
That's good. We have the Saints on woman.
Yeah, we got this person is, school needs reform, but I addressed that with the CRT is the least of the problems. Not a lot of. Does anyone have any questions? Anyone want to throw in a question for Quincy? Anybody who's still here who would like to ask him a question? Otherwise,
critical race theory is awesome. Awful. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's but I don't know. when you said chasing ghosts, that really resonated with me because I don't like to live in the past. And I
Hmm.
think people get confused. They think when you say, I don't want to live in the past, that you want to forget the past. And it's like,
No,
no, I just don't want to live there. I think you can learn about the past and you can be reverent about aspects of it and you can be disgusted by parts of it, but you can acknowledge the reality that progress has been made. You can acknowledge that we are not living there now. It is not the Jim Crow South. Is it perfect? No, but it's not the Jim Crow South. It's not even close to that at all.
well, there's and to broaden the conversation out, there's a thing. There's first, I mean, there's critical theory that is a little bit more higher up on that scale, and then when I say chasing ghosts, there's other ghosts that you like. Let's say it's just activism in general. I'm not like against activism, but a lot of activism doesn't come with a disclaimer, such as let's say that you want to chase ending poverty. What does that mean? Because if you're well versed in mathematics, you know that at any given time on this planet, you're going to have people who are at the bottom and you're going to have people at the top. That's the way lists are created. So, what does that mean to chase poverty? Like, let's say that we get everyone at an income of 50K. Like, let's say we can magically erase all of that and like everyone makes 50K. The people who are making 50K are going to be on the bottom. And that is now the new poverty. So, what does that mean? There's no context or critical thinking to a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to, you won't find any real thinkers because all the intellectuals who are coming out, I wouldn't say all, but a lot of the intellectuals who come out of these programs or these colleges with all these degrees, they only see the world through the cathedral of college and they're not thinking critically about what's going on. They're thinking for their tribe or they're just regurgitating stuff, but they may use fancy words with it because that's what that's what their education taught them to do. And I think that's why critical race theory has got the legs that it's gotten because a lot of these people are just regurgitating things without. And it's ironic that it's called critical race theory because there's no critical thinking behind it.
Well, and you're not allowed to criticize it either. So now Adrian has asked, how would you approach empowering students to eventually take charge of their own future?
That's a very huge question. I think it has to come through culture, and that's not really a answer that it's not a very direct answer. It has to come through culture because I was empowered by seeing other people, other leaders in my community, um, doing things that are positive. And I think back to children who grow up in impoverished homes or whatever. If every day is like a bad day for you and you don't see anybody doing anything successful, anybody that's doing anything that is remotely helpful for the community, then you don't have any examples. Like you have to put kids in you got to put them in front of people who are empowering the community for them to want to aspire to that. You have to let them know that that's an option.
And I think
Think,
it'd be good if they weren't always celebrities too. Like, I mean, part of
yes,
the problem with the fame, I mean, I love it when I don't no disparagement at all when you have, sports heroes whenever go into a community and do things for the community. I think it's great, obviously, but we need also to see people who are professionals in a variety of fields that kids probably don't even know exist. Like your field, digital marketing, right? I mean,
yes,
they
yeah,
don't even know what that's about, and there's a host of other kinds of fields that they could be made aware of just by people doing that kind of outreach. That's one of the reasons I really love Project Hood, is that he's about it, right, in
yeah.
Chicago.
Mhm.
But I think groups like that um are we need more of them. I mean, if you could reproduce that across every major city in the United States, I think you'd get somewhere. And if he had the ability to help more kids, right? I mean, there's a limited capacity with that as well. And then they have to want it. I mean, by the time when they show up there, there's already usually a reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to see at younger ages. I would love to see programs where kids get that exposure to real world interactions with people at a much younger age, much younger, like
Yeah.
elementary school.
And yeah, it's all about exposure. I think that's the number one thing when you expose children and that, and you like everyone gets exposed to the television. Uh, and even if you do have the internet, it's like, I mean, the internet is huge. You can go to, I don't know, Facebook every day. That's not going to really expose you to anything. I think it has to be a very uh, precise and action that has to be taken by the parents as far as, or whoever their caretakers are, to like take them to this place to let them see what it's like, um, or
Well,
interact with someone that has a high sense of achievement. If that makes
and
sense.
I think this is also where we need to step away from race being at the center of it. So I guess what I'm saying is like, I think if you want to address race as far as, with kids or whatever, I don't like how it's being used across every single thing. Like there's this notion of representation. And I
Um,
watched a YouTube today with Gothics, and she did a great job of tackling how there's, people want representation in entertainment, for example. And then she talked about maybe she'd come back and do one with, the workplace and so on. But she made a point that stuck with me, and that was that if a parent says, well, I want my child to see someone that looks like them as a hero. And she said, you look like them, you're their hero. You should be there. Like you
wow.
shouldn't need to see, your child shouldn't need to identify with every potential hero. It's very limiting. It's very self-limiting. They should just identify with the qualities of that person. If you see, it could be any person. And now, if you happen to find, the astrophysicist or the whatever you want to, introduce the child to, and they happen to be Black, super, right? That's fantastic. But I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying if you won't do it because you can't find representation, or you're going to make it all about the representation, and then it's very limiting to like, okay, here's the group of people who are going to come in and speak. The kids are going to miss out. They're going to miss out on all kinds of other opportunities.
I'm glad you brought that up because in digital marketing, it's hard to find any black males in digital marketing at all. And another thing to that is, like, let's say that you have the worldview that you need to see a person who represents your race or ethnic group in this position. Well, how do you think that person got there? If this industry doesn't have representation, your child could be that person who breaks that barrier. They're
Correct.
not going to break that barrier because you didn't expose them to that industry. Let's say it's physics. You didn't expose them to that industry because there's no representation. But if you expose them to the ideas, and if you teach them that, human first, I like to say, instead of
Yes.
always thinking that the race, an immutable characteristic, is the most important thing, then they're going to automatically limit themselves to what they see. And that's probably a basketball or rap or something like that. Like,
Right.
all of us are victims of it. Everyone in the hood wanted to be a rapper. But
Right.
if you don't expose a child to that kind of stuff, then you will never have the breakthroughs that you need to do. It's almost like you're you're solving the problem. You think you're solving the problem, but you're really making it worse by
Right.
not teaching children to be humans first and to look at ideas and look at things. And like, you could be that first person in that industry, if that makes sense.
Right. No, it totally does. And I think too that they could be the first. They could also learn from people who don't look like them. And
Yes.
I mean, that's, I I just think back to, so many of the teachers and professors I had, and how many of them, just as an example, were men. That's a big topic too. It's like, oh, we need more women doing everything, right? Well, I actually count myself fortunate that I had so many professors in college who were actually, a mixture. There were men. I had
Mhm.
male professors, and um, I don't know how to explain it, but they were experts in their field, and that's what mattered to me. So I shouldn't say I was glad they were men. It's not that. It's just I was glad I had the experts in the field and that it didn't matter to somebody whether they were men or women. Let me put it to you that way.
Yes.
So I didn't sit there in class and say, "Oh, Professor Bassett's a dude," like so I can't learn from him. Like he was a genius, and I learned so much, and it never dawned on me, like it never crossed my mind, like, oh, I wish I were learning from a woman.
No.
And it just didn't even cross my mind at all. And then he team taught a class. This guy was my major advisor, and he team taught a literature class with a woman. And she had a very specific agenda. She wasn't just a woman, she was a gay woman. She was a lesbian. And he team taught from very different perspectives. He was teaching more like the classics that we had to read, and
Mhm.
she was teaching the new stuff like the Color Purple and all that kind of stuff. And they would like duke it out on the stage, and they would kind of argue with each other about different things. And I will tell you that was fabulous. That was so I am not opposed. I don't want anyone in my audience to think that I don't want a heterodoxy of thought. Okay. I think we need that. You need kids, especially, growing
Yeah.
minds need to see ideas, debated. And if there are people who are brave enough to do that, then awesome, let them do that. See, the problem I have today is, as you said, there's no critical part of it. We're not seeing those substantive debates where people really do duke it out on the field of ideas.
No.
And then you can walk away with you can make your own conclusions, of course. But what I'm seeing is there's one right way. There's like one right way to think. There's one right way to do it. And it went from the academy, and now it's filtering down into the elementary school to where now the little kids are being told the same thing. So not only would they not necessarily be exposed to different kinds of people, but they're also not getting exposed to diversity of ideas. And the ideas that they're being told are the right ideas, I don't think are helpful to
Yeah.
their long-term success, I guess, is the progression that I go through.
Well, there's another aspect of that, like from like what I just said about the internet and cryptocurrency and the blockchain. All of these are new technologies in terms of the human race, and there's a ton of problems to be solved with that. And there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to figure out. There's no way that you can approach these problems with one heterodoxy or like a ideology about these things.
Yeah.
And we're raising children that don't know how to go into a situation they've never been before and figure things out. You need critical thinking. You need a diversity of ideas. You need to be able to grapple with ideas
Right.
in order to solve these problems. And I feel like a lot of children aren't. And the people who are solving the problems are the people who are just gonna, they're the finance majors and the business majors. And
Well, we hope, but maybe, like they're increasingly, that's not, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it kind of brings us full circle to your blog piece, because that was about critical thinking and
Mhm.
how you felt like you were looking around, not really seeing it being done, and you wanted to, say something about it, but didn't feel comfortable, like, because you weren't supposed to. Like like you're not supposed to question this stuff. You're supposed to have these ideas, or else maybe you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
So, but I don't know. I'm glad you started a YouTube channel. I'm excited. So, tell me. Let me put up a banner. What's it called?
It's called I brought receipts. That's also the name of the Medium publication that I do all my writing. Well, I don't do all my writing there. That's just like cultural topics.
Okay, I brought receipts, guys. It's a YouTube channel that he's got. Everybody go subscribe.
I started it just a couple of weeks ago, and so the videos I think I have 3 videos on there.
Okay.
I've been scared. I've had race conversations, but I'm scared to put those up. I'm gonna put them up though. But the two that I have on there are cryptocurrency. I'm really into cryptocurrency right now, and like I think it's the wave of the future, and I feel like we need to be educated on that. I have discussions about it all the time. I have a group in Clubhouse where we talk about it. So
Yeah. Well, it is I mean, from what I understand, it's a little bit safer from the grasp of government.
yes, for now.
For now. That's why I was like hesitant to say anything because I'm like, I don't know what they're gonna do next. But yeah, I'm ignorant, so I'll have to watch your videos because that's an area where I know nothing, and I got a lot to learn. I understand in theory how it works and blockchain how that works, but in terms of the actual like investment potential, it's a mystery to me.
Yeah, I mean, well, the investment part is the easiest part. I think the hardest part is understanding how it works and blockchain, understanding how the blockchain works, because the blockchain technology is what's going to, I think, replace a lot of things online.
Don't you think that would have been a great technology to employ to solve some of our election problems?
Oh yes,
I
most
mean, if you
definitely. Oh my God, yes.
if you want to make sure you have secure elections, there you go. That's how you do it.
Everyone can see everything that is happening. There's no fudging the data. There's none of that. So
No. So I mean, and now we're the well anyway, but that we could go down a rabbit hole with that whole conversation. But you've been very generous to give me this much of your time.
thank
And
you.
I really appreciate it. Like I said, I know there were some naysayers in the crowd, but I just wanted to, give you a platform to say what you had to say. And I know there are a lot of people who don't agree with me on this stuff, but I'm just very concerned about the children. My number one concern is the children. And when I say the children, I mean like any child, any individual child. That's
Well,
my number one concern.
it's I think it should be the number one concern, because I mean, unfortunately, I've learned that it's harder to teach adults. But with that being said, it's like I think I have a lot of life experience, and I think that the next generation that's coming behind us, they need to understand that the world isn't this evil, racist place that these that they're making it out to be. I'm not sure what's going to happen with like critical race theory and all these other weird philosophies, but they need to be challenged.
And that's what we're trying to do. I mean, in my small way, I'm trying to do it. Then you got James Lindsay and Carlin, and so many people are trying to speak out and challenge it in different ways. I'm just doing this, but to try to challenge it from the parents and kids perspective.
Mhm.
I'm trying to uh, amplify the voices of the people who are doing it in court, um, because I think there's some hope there. I don't
Mhm.
have a lot of hope, but I think there's some.
Mhm.
And then but I really think it's going to come down to each individual family, each individual person rejecting it in their own life. I mean, imagine if each of us just did that, just refused to comply.
Mhm.
Because I really believe there are way more people that have an issue with this stuff, with these narratives, than about, but they're not willing necessarily to
No.
do the thing, to physically move their feet in the opposite direction for fear of offending people. And then I think about some of the bad things that have happened in history, and I wonder to myself, how many Germans or how many Cambodians or how many Chinese, like how many of these people were like, well, I just don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to get in trouble.
I
And
think
if they all rock the boat at the same time, that Yertle the turtle would fall out, like whoever the despot of the day was would have fallen out.
well, I think that's the epitome of 20. Like one of the saddest things I've learned in 2020 is that I don't want to use the word coward, but like people, fear is extremely powerful. I had to grapple with fear, and like if you get it in people's heads that like, hey, this thing will happen to you, you can lose your life if you say these things, then yeah, most people will cower in fear. That's exactly what happened with Germany and all these other
Yeah.
places.
It doesn't take much, and people forget that. They're like, no, they must have been lots of crazy people. I'm like, nope, just regular people who were, and they also think it happened like overnight, and they forget that this was like little chip away at their freedoms. And every time it was always for your safety, for your safety, for your safety, for, because these people are a threat to the country. Like this group, first it was a trade unionist, and then the communists, and then they did. He said terrible things about Jews, but he wasn't putting them immediately into camps. It was just, oh, we're so unfortunate to have these Jews here, right? Well, what are we hearing now? We're so unfortunate to have these conservatives and these Republicans, whatever. And I'm not even a Republican, but I don't like hearing people talk about other
No,
people.
it's scary. It's
Yeah.
scary.
It's like you're lumping millions of people into one bucket, you realize. Like, that's a lot of people to just write off as evil. I don't even do that with people on the left. Like, I'll say the left, but I'm really trying to talk about like the very specific people who are pushing these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
The ones who are like actively doing this and actively canceling people and doing that kind of stuff. If you're just, your regular garden variety liberal person and just trying to get through your days like everybody else, I have nothing against you. You're just a person, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so what I have a problem with is the people saying anyone who voted this way is evil. It's like you're dehumanizing millions of human beings. That's like very messed up.
Well, even that, I think even that, that way of thinking, that paradigm did just come out of nowhere. I mean, that's years of the demonization of anyone who wasn't liberal, and like, yeah. So
But
these,
when you were growing up in Jackson, you didn't did you hear, like any of the, I know you didn't have like the white liberal rhetoric stuff until you got to Chicago, but in your own community, was there any kind of like large scale, sort of message of resentment or anger or anything like that? Or was it just kind of like, no, just getting through the day?
yeah, I mean, everyone, no one likes Bush. There was a few, I think all the, I wouldn't call it smarter, but like all the kids who were like more aware of things, we talked about it a little bit. Like, we couldn't stand Bush and all this kind of stuff. And then it graduated. It's kind of like, oh, this thing is happening. Then I think when the Iraq War happened, people were like, oh yeah, Bush he's an awful person, but yeah, he is smart to like trick everyone like that. So it's like the conversations were never like super like, let's do this thing. It was more observational.
Yeah, it was like, that guy's a jerk, and I don't like his policies.
Yeah, yeah. It was
like your standard political conversation that we used to have way back in the day when it wasn't like existential threat to my existence.
no, it was nothing like that. It was like, yeah, forget that guy. He sucks. And like, and we all voted Democrat and like, whatever. That had no impact on our lives,
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's just all different now. I'm hopeful that, well, I don't know. I don't know how much hope I have, but I'm trying. I'm trying. I'm trying. So, all right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up. And when we go offline, just stay on in the studio thing after I shut it off, and then we'll chat briefly. But thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who
thank you
stuck with us and watched and asked questions, and even you, Batiri Sans. I hope I said that name right. I do agree with the point that the CRT is the least of our problems, believe it or not. I agree with that. All right, signing off. I'll see you in a sec.